600 people vanished and left behind a single sentence written in chalk on a schoolroom blackboard. No bodies, no luggage, no credible explanation. Just those words in a Brazilian town in 1923. That fact alone should stop you, but it is only one of 13. 13 real places where the human story didn't end, it just stopped. Some were abandoned in fear, some in desperation, some for reasons that have never been named. What they share is the absence of a conclusion. Empty houses, untouched tables, open books, and a silence that has lasted decades or longer. Under a small city in Pennsylvania, a coal seam has been burning since the 1960s. It will continue to burn for approximately 250 more years. The town above it was evacuated, then officially erased from state maps. The fire doesn't need permission to keep going. On the other side of the world, a Japanese island that once held the highest population density ever recorded, emptied in 3 months. Not because of disaster, but because an industry ended and nobody came back. Some of these places were not abandoned quietly. A fishing village in Alaska emptied because its people were afraid of something they refused to say out loud. A village in Rajasthan disappeared in a single night and left a curse so serious that the land has remained unoccupied ever since. A town in Connecticut drove its residents toward madness with such consistency that access to the site remains restricted today. In Canada, an entire lakeside community vanished, 2,000 people, and the graves were emptied too. Whatever happened, it reached even the dead. Others collapsed more slowly. An Australian mining town was poisoned by its own industry across many years before the government simply deleted it from official records. An Italian island in a lagoon absorbed so many of the city's dead over centuries that half its soil is now human ash. An Argentine resort sank beneath a lake and resurfaced as white salt formations. The mineral skeleton of streets and buildings that once held a living town. A Greek city, built on what is now Turkish territory, was abandoned once, then offered to new inhabitants, who refused it. A Cypriot beach resort stopped in 1974 and has not moved since. Some beds still on the sand, glasses still on the tables, the whole place frozen mid-afternoon. And Roanoke, the first English settlement in America, vanished completely, leaving a single carved word that no one has fully explained. Some of these places you will recognize, others you have never heard of. Every one of them is real. An entire town walked away and never came back. Not from war, not from flood, not from fire, but from something no official report ever named. That is the strange legacy of Portlock, also known as Port Chatham, a fishing settlement on the southern tip of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula and number 13 on our list. Built in the early 20th century, Portlock was a working community. Families, most of them descendants of Alaska's indigenous peoples, fished for salmon and cod. A small cannery processed the catch. The docks, the houses, the rhythm of the tides, all of it pointed toward permanence. Then, sometime in the 1940s, men began disappearing. Fishermen who walked into the forest or down to the shore alone did not return. When bodies were eventually found, what investigators and locals saw on them didn't add up. Bone fractures inconsistent with falls, and tracks pressed into the ground that matched no known animal in the region. The indigenous people of the Kenai Peninsula had a name for what they believed was responsible. Nantinak, a massive, bipedal creature said to inhabit these forests with ferocity. Across Alaska, different nations describe something similar under different names, and those who had lived on this land for generations did not treat the stories as folklore. They treated them as facts. No formal investigation into the deaths or disappearances was ever launched. No authority arrived with answers. By 1950, the fear had compounded past the point where daily life was possible, and the residents of Portlock made a collective decision. They packed what they could carry, left the rest, and did not look back. The cannery, the docks, the houses, all of it abandoned in what was, by every account, an orderly and deliberate exodus. The village has never been permanently resettled. Today, the ruins sit on the coastline, accessible only by boat or small aircraft. The walls lean into the encroaching forest. The equipment has turned to rust. Documentary records are thin, witnesses are gone, and the official silence has never been broken.
Portlock occupies an uncomfortable position between documented history and oral tradition, and it is that unresolved tension that gives this place its lasting weight. The town that follows on our list was also abandoned, but for reasons science has fully explained, which, as it turns out, makes it no less chilling. A town doesn't just go mad, and yet, over the course of roughly a century, that is precisely what Dudleytown, Connecticut appears to have done. Quietly, steadily, and completely. Number 12 on our list sits in the dense hardwood forests of Litchfield County, in the hills of New England, where oak and maple grow so close together that sunlight never reaches the ground, not even at noon. What remains of the settlement are stone foundations, barely visible beneath thick moss, and a silence so total it feels deliberate. The Dudley family arrived from England in the 18th century. In the Old Country, their name carried weight of a grim kind. Multiple family members had been executed for treason, and Edmund Dudley had been beheaded on the orders of Henry VIII himself. Legend, and it is worth being precise that this is legend, holds that whatever curse followed the Dudleys in England made the crossing with them to the New World. That narrative is compelling precisely because the documented facts offer something almost as unsettling. Over approximately 100 years, residents of Dudleytown experienced mental illness at rates that struck observers as abnormally high. Several took their own lives, others were committed to asylums. By the mid-19th century, the village was entirely empty. Scholars point to isolation, poor soil conditions, and potential environmental stresses as explanations.
These are plausible, rational, and arguably more disturbing than a generational curse, because they suggest the place itself was the problem. Not a supernatural inheritance, but a material one. Today, the land is owned by a private organisation called Dark Entry Forest, and it is closed to visitors with an enforcement that is anything but ceremonial. Fences, patrols, real fines, actual arrests. That legal wall of silence, more than any ghost story, keeps the legend alive and growing. What cannot be examined cannot be explained. What cannot be explained cannot be dismissed. From Dudleytown's slow unravelling of individual minds, we move next to something operating on an entirely different scale. Not the quiet disappearance of people over generations, but the sudden, total vanishing of an entire town in a single night. 600 people vanished without leaving a single body. That is the central fact of Verde, and after 100 years, it remains without a credible explanation.
The town existed in the state of Minas Gerais in the Brazilian interior. By 1923, it held several hundred houses, a church, a school, a market, and roughly 600 residents. An ordinary provincial settlement, unremarkable in every respect, until February of that year, when travellers arrived and found it completely empty. What made the discovery strange was not only the absence of people, but the precise quality of that absence. Food sat on tables, still warm in some houses. Livestock stood in their pens, personal belongings, birth certificates, church records, untouched, in place, as though the inhabitants had simply stepped out and not come back. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, no evidence of mass flight. A pistol found in one home had been fired once. There was no casing, no wound, no explanation for the shot. On the blackboard of the schoolhouse, someone had written in chalk, "There is no salvation."
The sentence has since become the defining image of the case. Not a cry of panic, but a composed, declarative statement, which in some ways makes it harder to dismiss. An official investigation was opened. It produced nothing. Authorities recorded the disappearance of approximately 600 persons. Not one of them surfaced afterward, alive or dead, anywhere. This is case number 11, Verde, Brazil. Historians and journalists who have revisited the record in the decades since note that primary sources are sparse and that some details may have grown in the retelling. Parts of the story could be embellished. But the core event was reported in the Brazilian press at the time, and the core event is this. An entire town emptied overnight, and no authority, investigator, or researcher has produced an account of where its people went. Number 10. An entire village vanished overnight, and no one, not the survivors, not the investigators, not anyone who has studied the case since, has ever produced a credible explanation. In November of 1930, Canadian trapper Joe LaBelle arrived at an Inuit settlement on the shores of Anjikuni Lake, expecting the familiar warmth of fires and company. He had been here before. He knew the people. Instead, he walked into absolute silence. Around 2,000 inhabitants were gone. What makes the disappearance so difficult to rationalize is not simply the scale, it is the evidence left behind. The cooking pots still held food. Furs were stretched across their poles mid-process. Tools, weapons, every piece of essential equipment remained exactly where it had been placed. Nobody packed for a journey. In the Arctic tundra, that is not an oversight. It is an impossibility. A person who leaves without supplies does not survive. 7 or 8 sled dogs were found tied to stakes along the shore, dead from starvation. For Inuit communities, abandoning dogs is not a cultural option. It does not happen. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched a formal investigation and arrived at a conclusion that offered no comfort. There were no viable theories. Every logical framework, mass migration, epidemic, hostile encounter, collapsed against the physical evidence. And then there were the graves. Several burial sites on the edge of the village had been opened. The bodies of ancestors had been removed and taken away alongside the living. In Inuit tradition, ancestral remains are not moved. They are not disturbed. The fact that someone, or something, compelled the removal of both the living community and the dead suggests either an overwhelming external force or a ritual act so far outside documented practice that it resists all interpretation. The case was never closed. Not one resident of Anjikuni Lake was ever found, alive or dead, then or since. Our next entry takes us from the Canadian tundra to an Italian lagoon and an island whose soil is built half from the ashes of 160,000 dead. The ground beneath Poveglia Island is approximately 50% human ash and bone. That is not metaphor, not legend. It is the conclusion of geological surveys conducted on this 7-hectare island in Venice's southern lagoon. Number 9 on our list, Poveglia has spent centuries functioning as a destination you did not choose and from which you did not return. The Italian government has maintained an official ban on private visits for decades. Local fishermen avoid casting their nets near its shores, not out of superstition, but for a practical reason. Hooks catch on human remains too often. The island's story begins quietly enough in the 9th century, when it served as a modest fortified outpost. What changed everything was the 14th century and the arrival of bubonic plague. The Venetian Republic understood that a trading city survives only through absolute containment. Poveglia became the solution. The infected, the dying, and the already dead were all brought here. Funeral pyres burned for weeks without stopping. When the plague returned in subsequent centuries, the same process repeated. Historians estimate that more than 160,000 people were processed through this island. Processed is the right word. In 1889, a psychiatric hospital opened on the grounds. Venetian oral history carries accounts of a chief physician who allegedly conducted brutal experiments on patients before falling or being thrown from the hospital's bell tower. These accounts cannot be verified through documents, but the hospital did close in 1968, and the island has been empty ever since.
Today, the collapsed hospital wards and the old church bell tower are slowly disappearing into overgrowth. Venice has auctioned the island multiple times. Each time, buyers have walked away. The island sits unclaimed in the lagoon, available in principle and untouchable in practice. Nobody took anything. No furniture dragged out, no walls stripped for materials, no pots broken in a hurry. Nearly 1,500 people walked out of Kuldhara overnight in 1825 and left everything exactly where it stood, and that is what makes this place genuinely unsettling. Number 8 on our list sits in the heart of the Thar Desert in Rajasthan, India, where summer temperatures exceed 50 degrees Celsius and sandstorms can bury structures within hours. Under those conditions, an abandoned village should have been swallowed by the desert within a generation. Kuldhara was not. The ochre mud brick walls still stand. The arched doorways still frame empty courtyards. The stone floors are still there beneath a thin layer of drifting sand. The explanation most commonly cited traces back to a single act of coercion. Salim Singh, a despotic tax collector and minister, demanded that the village elders hand over one of their daughters as his wife. The elders of Kuldhara, a prosperous Paliwal Brahmin settlement, part of a network of 94 villages, understood their position precisely. Compliance meant permanent dishonour. Refusal meant violent reprisal. They chose a third option: collective disappearance. Before dawn, the entire community of the Pali Brotherhood dissolved into the desert. Before leaving, they cursed the land itself, declaring it uninhabitable for anyone who came after. What separates this from ordinary folklore is the documented pattern that followed. According to the Archaeological Survey and the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, multiple resettlement attempts were made over the subsequent centuries. Each failed. Residents reported unexplained anxiety and fear with no identifiable source, and left without completing any permanent occupation. 700 years of continuous life ended in a single night. Kuldhara today is a protected heritage site and one of the most studied abandoned settlements in South Asia. Next on our list, Poveglia Island, Italy, where the ground itself is made of the dead. A man lives alone in a city that spent 25 years underwater. That fact alone should be enough to stop you, but the story of Villa Epecuen, Argentina, number 7 on our list, goes much further than one man's stubbornness. In its prime, Villa Epecuen drew up to 25,000 visitors a season. The lake it sat beside had salt concentrations comparable to the Dead Sea, and the local tourism industry was built entirely on the belief that the water healed. Hotels filled every summer, children swam at the shore. The town was loud, functional, ordinary in the best possible way. In November 1985, heavy rainfall raised the lake level beyond what the protective dam could handle. The dam broke. What followed wasn't a sudden wall of water. It was a slow, days-long advance that gave roughly 1,500 residents enough time to gather their belongings and leave. They walked out watching the streets fill behind them. Then the water kept rising and rising. At its peak, Villa Epecuen lay beneath up to 10 meters of salt water. Streets, rooftops, trees, gravestones, all of it submerged and held there for a quarter century. The lake eventually began to recede. By 2009, the ruins were surfacing. What emerged looked nothing like a town.
The salt had stripped everything to its structural minimum. Walls without roofs, cars without paint, trees without bark, all of it bleached into a single pale monochrome. No colour survived. The salt had been thorough. Pablo Novak returned when the water left. He is the only permanent resident of Villa Epecuen today, and he has become the human face of the place. Photographed, interviewed, cited in articles about memory and loss. His presence makes the ruin legible in a way that photographs alone cannot. Villa Epecuen didn't end in a night. It drowned over days and returned over years. That slowness is what makes it so difficult to process. There was no single catastrophic moment, only a gradual erasure and an equally gradual reappearance, both more unsettling than any instant disaster could be. A town can be erased from every map, every road sign, every official database, and still go on killing people. That is Wittenoom, Western Australia, number 6 on our list, and the story behind it is not one of natural disaster or geological bad luck. It is a story of choices, corporate choices, government choices, and decades of deliberate silence. Wittenoom was once home to nearly 20,000 people. Miners and their families settled in the valley in the late 1930s, when the blue asbestos deposits there, chrysidolite, the most dangerous form of asbestos known to science, made the region commercially valuable. Mining began in 1937 and continued until 1966. The reason it stopped had nothing to do with safety. The ore body had simply run out of profit. By the time the last shift ended, both the mining company and the Australian government had long been aware of the hazard. Internal reports documented the risks. Workers were not told. Chrysidolite fibres are extraordinarily fine. They penetrate deep lung tissue and cannot be expelled. The body cannot break them down. Over the following decades, they trigger mesothelioma, an aggressive cancer for which there remains no reliable cure. The latency period ranges from 20 to 50 years, meaning a child who played in the dust of Wittenoom in 1955 might not receive a diagnosis until the 2000s. The town emptied slowly after the mine closed, and then people began to die in numbers that drew attention. The government's response was unprecedented in its bluntness. Wittenoom was officially deleted. Its name was removed from maps, stripped from road signs, purged from navigation systems. Electricity was disconnected, water supply was cut, mail delivery ended. The stated goal was to make continued habitation impossible. A handful of residents refused to leave and remain there still. The dust in the valley floor continues to carry asbestos fibres. Wind moves those fibres across the surrounding landscape for kilometres in every direction. The buildings stand, the streets exist, but the town does not. Not legally, not officially, not on any document the state of Western Australia will acknowledge. It was not demolished, it was not flooded, it was crossed out. And it keeps killing, quietly, one person at a time, long after the industry that poisoned it ceased to exist. From the desert of Western Australia, we move now to a very different desert, Rajasthan, India, a place where an entire village rose in the night and walked away, and no one has fully explained why. A town of 3,500 stone houses stands intact, and every single one of them is empty. Not abandoned recently, not damaged by disaster, but deliberately, systematically left behind over a century ago and never reclaimed. This is Kayakoi, number 5 on our list, and its silence is the result of one of the largest forced population exchanges in recorded history. The settlement sits on the hillsides of the Bodrum Peninsula in southwestern Turkey, a few kilometers from the resort town of Fethiye. Before 1923, it was called Levisi, and it had been a Greek Orthodox community since the Middle Ages, merchants, craftsmen, and families who had quarried these limestone hills and built a town meant to last forever. By the early 20th century, several thousand people called it home. Then the Treaty of Lausanne redrew not just borders, but lives. Signed in January 1923 between Greece and Turkey, the agreement mandated the exchange of roughly 1.4 million Greeks from Asia Minor and approximately 500,000 Turks from Greece. The determining factor was religion, not language, not birthplace. The people of Levisi packed what they could carry and walked away permanently. Turkish authorities renamed the place Kayaköy and tried to resettle displaced Turkish families in the vacant homes. The families refused. They described the town as unbearable, something pressing down, something that would not leave. The houses stayed empty. 2 large Greek churches with intact mosaic floors remain as the clearest evidence that this was once a real city with a real pulse. Turkey now officially designates Kayaköy a monument to peace and friendship between nations. Tourists photograph the roofless walls every day. But no one lives here. That is the paradox of Kayaköy. Perfectly preserved, permanently uninhabited. Our number 4 location has a very different problem. It is on fire, literally right now, beneath the feet of the few people stubborn enough to remain. A town of a few hundred people in central Pennsylvania has been on fire for over 60 years, and no one has been able to stop it. Centralia didn't burn down in a night. It burned from the inside, slowly, invisibly, fed by the same coal seams that once made it a place worth living in. In May 1962, municipal workers lit a trash fire in an old strip mine that served as the town's landfill. The fire was doused, covered, declared out. It wasn't. It crept downward into a vast underground network of anthracite coal deposits, millions of years in the making, and it has been burning there ever since. For the first several years, residents noticed things they couldn't explain. Smoke seeping through cracks in the ground, vegetable gardens collapsing without warning, patches of pavement that stayed warm through winter while snow melted in uneven rings around them. Then, in 1981, the situation became undeniable. A 12-year-old boy fell into a sinkhole nearly 15 meters deep that opened suddenly beneath him in his own backyard. He survived. Bystanders pulled him out in time. Tests taken from inside the hole showed carbon monoxide at lethal concentrations. By the mid-1980s, the federal government had funded a relocation program. Residents left, houses were demolished, streets emptied. What remains today is closer to a map than a town. A few dozen structures, road signs pointing toward addresses that no longer exist, and an old cemetery the fire has spared because the soil composition beneath it is different. The official population is 5 people. The zip code has been cancelled. The fire now burns between 15 and 180 meters underground, covering an estimated 400 or more hectares of coal seam. Scientists project the remaining fuel could sustain it for another 250 years, possibly longer. Centralia ranks number 4 on our list. The town wasn't destroyed by war, flood, or plague. It was destroyed by a fire nobody lit on purpose, nobody can reach, and nobody can put out. For 50 years, no one has lived here. And yet the chairs are still upside down on the desks. Hashima Island, 15 kilometers off the coast of Nagasaki in the East China Sea, was abandoned in the spring of 1974. The evacuation took less than 3 months. What the residents left behind remained untouched. Furniture, clothing, school notebooks, the interiors of a functioning city frozen mid-sentence. This is number 3 on our list. The reason Hashima existed at all is coal. Mitsubishi began mining here in 1890, sinking shafts more than a kilometer beneath the seafloor. To house the workforce, the company built upward, layer after layer of concrete apartment blocks, rising from a reef barely 6 hectares in size. By the 1960s, over 5,400 people lived on that reef. The population density reached 83,000 people per square kilometre. No city, neighbourhood or settlement in recorded human history has ever come close to that number. The island was entirely self-contained out of necessity. There was nowhere else to go. The surrounding sea made sure of that, so Mitsubishi built everything: schools, a hospital, a cinema, a Buddhist temple, public bathhouses, pachinko halls. Children grew up without ever seeing a forest. Workers descended into the ocean floor each morning and returned to apartments stacked above the waves each night. From the water, the silhouette of Hashima looks exactly like a warship. Concrete walls, smokestacks, the hard angular geometry of industry. That is how it earned the name Gunkanjima, Battleship Island. The mine closed in February 1974 because oil had made coal obsolete in Japan's industrial economy. The island was decommissioned like a vessel taken out of service. In 2019, Hashima was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, though the designation came with a significant condition. Japan was required to acknowledge the use of forced Korean and Chinese labour on the island during the Second World War. The concrete is crumbling now, but it hasn't fallen yet. Number 2 on this list is a place where you could theoretically walk into a hotel room and find a suitcase still packed, a dress still hanging in the wardrobe, a half-written postcard on the nightstand. Not as a museum exhibit, as an accident of history that nobody ever cleaned up. Varosha, the southern district of Famagusta in Cyprus, was sealed off on July 20th, 1974, when Turkish forces landed on the island. In the hours that followed, approximately 45,000 residents fled, Greek Cypriots who had built their lives in what was, by any measure, one of the most glamorous resort destinations on Earth. Before that Tuesday in July, Varosha was the kind of place that attracted Elizabeth Taylor, Brigitte Bardot, and Richard Burton. Luxury high-rise hotels lined the beachfront. Casinos and restaurants ran through the night. Cyprus was called the Pearl of the Mediterranean, and Varosha was the reason. The residents left, expecting to return within days. Some left refrigerators running, some left keys in locks. The Turkish military surrounded the district with barbed wire, posted armed guards, and declared the entire area off-limits. To journalists, to tourists, to the former owners of every building inside. That closure lasted nearly 50 years. Inside, without maintenance or human presence, the district came apart slowly and then all at once. Roofs collapsed, swimming pools filled with vegetation, cars rusted through on open parking lots. Shop mannequins bleached to featureless white shapes behind cracked glass. The rare aerial or maritime photograph showed something that looked like a film set for the end of the world, an entire urban district frozen in 1974. In 2020, Turkish authorities reopened a strip of the beachfront. The move drew immediate international condemnation and a United Nations resolution. The bulk of Varosha remains closed. What makes Varosha more than a ruin is precisely this. The closure was never accidental. The frozen city is a political instrument, and the year 1974 is its sharpest edge. The next place on this list was consumed by something with no date, no army, and no resolution waiting. An entire English colony vanished without leaving a single body, a single grave, or a single explanation. That is not a legend or an exaggeration. It is the documented historical record of Roanoke, and no one has been able to fully account for it in over 400 years. In 1587, England made its most ambitious push yet into the New World. 115 settlers, men, women, and children, landed on Roanoke Island off what is now the North Carolina coast. Among them was Virginia Dare, the first child of European descent born on American soil, delivered just weeks after the colony established itself. Her grandfather, Governor John White, sailed back to England almost immediately to secure additional supplies, expecting to return within months. The war with the Spanish Armada made that impossible. He was stranded for 3 years. When White finally reached the shore in 1590, the settlement was empty in a way that made no sense. No bodies, no signs of attack, no personal belongings scattered in panic. The fort had been methodically dismantled, the structures taken apart with care. The only message left behind was carved into a post at the entrance. Croatoan, the name of a nearby island and the indigenous people who lived there. The letters CRO appeared on a separate tree. White believed it signaled a planned relocation and tried to reach Croatoan Island, but a storm forced his ship to turn back. He never returned. The paradox that has driven centuries of inquiry is this. The evidence points simultaneously toward a peaceful departure and a complete disappearance. Theories have ranged from gradual assimilation with the Hatteras tribe to starvation, hostile raids, Spanish attack, and epidemic disease. In 2012, a patch on one of White's own maps was found to conceal a symbol, a possible inland fort site. Excavations there uncovered 16th century European ceramics, evidence of presence, not of fate. Not one of the 115 colonists has ever been traced. Roanoke opens this list not because it is the oldest mystery, but because it set the terms for every disappearance that followed. How a community can cease to exist before it ever had the chance to leave a record of itself. 600 people vanished from a Brazilian town and left behind a single sentence on a chalkboard. No bodies, no trail, no answer. That is not legend. That is the documented record of Verde, and it is one of 13 places on this planet where human presence ended without explanation. Most disappearances have a cause. These do not. A fisherman from Portlock tracked footprints into the snow and was never seen again. The residents of Dudleytown heard something moving through the dark forest and lost their minds, one by one, in ways no physician could account for. The village of Anjikuni emptied so fast that food was still sitting warm over open fire when outsiders arrived, and the graves had been opened, the dead taken alongside the living. Poveglia holds the ash of 160,000 people in its soil. Kuldhara has stood cursed since 1825. Epecuen drowned, then rose again as a bleached skeleton of walls and streets. Wittenoom kills those who enter. Kayakoi was built for thousands and has held no one since. Centralia burns underground with no projected end. Hashima stands silent in open water. Famagusta has been sealed behind wire for 50 years. And Roanoke, the oldest silence on this list, never explained where its people went. The pattern is not supernatural, it is something more unsettling, history reaching a full stop where a sentence should be. Not every story resolves. Some end in a silence that outlasts everyone who asked the question. If this made you think, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories ahead that refuse every explanation.